Welcome back to Liberty Bytes on the Think Liberty Network. I'm your host, William Gadsden. You can follow me on Twitter at William_Gadsden, and follow Think Liberty on Facebook, Twitter, or whatever your favorite social media outlet is. You can also follow me on Facebook at William Gadsden Political Commentator. So give us a follow and a like for updates on new episodes and more. We also have a Patreon now, so if you'd like to support our work, check it out at patreon.com/ThinkLibertyPatrons. And of course, the most important, most helpful thing you can do is just share the link for this podcast episode on whatever platform you're listening to it on. So it is week. Man, I've lost track of time. I've been indoors for so long. Anyway, we're still in quarantine. Things are just getting weirder and weirder out there. There's a lot going on. We got the election coming up. Oil prices are literally in the negatives at this point. And the economy still hasn't responded across the entire market. So we're all just kind of holding our breaths and waiting for the other shoe to drop. So with that in mind, I want to go over sort of a hodgepodge of these different things that are going on right now and just clarify some things in this just really strange timeline that we find ourselves in. So first of all, if y'all have been watching the daily press briefings with President Trump, there's a lot of conflicting information coming out about them. And of course, you know, once you put it through the BS filter that is the mainstream media, things just get even more confusing. So what I'm talking about is how the media is trying to drum up this story of, some sort of disagreement between President Trump and Dr. Fauci, the head medical officer of the coronavirus task force, and is always, by President Trump's side and speaking about the coronavirus. The mainstream media takes these briefings and they will cut up the conversations that are going on between them, or even like they'll bring in a body language expert or whatever. And all of their responses and all of their lines are centered around this idea that there is some sort of disagreement or, like a civil war between President Trump and Dr. Fauci. And that is simply not the case. As soon as, since we all have a little bit more time on our hands now, right? Take the lines, the quotes, whatever else the mainstream media is using to try to push this narrative, and then go to that day's press briefing and just watch it. And then see if you can pinpoint exactly where those quotes are and take in the full context. In fact, Dr. Fauci himself has come out and said, no, there are no major disagreements going on between the president and I. Please stop reporting this to the mainstream media. But of course, their job at this point is just to sow division and act as agents of chaos. But as these things are going on, President Trump himself is saying things that contradict what he has said before. So specifically, I want to point out, let's see, this was probably about a week and a half ago. One of the reporters asked President Trump, when do you want to reopen the economy and are you going to force this thing and everything else? And President Trump, to his credit, makes it very clear that he does not have the power to do that as the chief executive. He again, to his credit, he says, well, there's this thing called the Constitution, and it doesn't allow me to do that. Bravo. Bravo, sir. Let me give you credit where credit is due. You do have a constitution that you have to abide by. It is in your oath when you became president of the United States. So good for you, Mr. President. Good for you. So to clarify, what he's talking about is within the Constitution itself. Of course, this is something that I've talked about pretty frequently. But there's a part of the Constitution referred to as the Commerce Clause. So this is in Article 2, where it is outlining the responsibilities and the duties of the federal government. And it very strictly says that the federal government does not have the power to dictate or regulate intra-state economies or intra-state markets. So what that means is within the borders of a state, the federal government has no jurisdiction or control over the state economy. Now, they do have control and jurisdiction over interstate economies. So as soon as that that economy, whatever the action is that's taking place, crosses a state line, then the government can take steps to regulate that. And of course, there is a long series in history of Supreme Court cases arguing and sort of going back and forth about how far the federal government can actually go, even in those cases. So there is the Commerce Clause. But ultimately, when it comes down to deciding when and how each state can reopen their economies, that is strictly up to the governors of each state. So most people don't know this. I know y'all are listening to my podcast, so you're probably a really smart audience. You probably already know these things. But most people don't understand that. And this only feeds the idea that the federal government is all-encompassing, it's all-powerful, and therefore we need to demand that the federal government does something. Not understanding that, you know, if you go back to a basic civics class, you know that that's not how that works. It's up to the states to decide. That's why we have this entire system of federalism. But people don't understand that anymore. And so we continue to believe that the federal government is all-powerful and that it can do whatever we demand of it. And there are actors within the federal government that would like nothing more than to make what we think is reality into actual reality. They want that kind of power. And so when you've got this general public opinion, this public idea that they are all-powerful, and if we just demand that they do these things enough, then they'll do it for us. Yeah, they will take that power. And it will be our fault. We will deserve what comes as a result of that. But anyway, as it stands right now, if we abide by the Constitution, it is strictly up to the governors of each state to decide when and how to reopen their state economies. So I got a little bit ahead of myself because in that first instance, President Trump said, we have a constitution. We have this thing called the Constitution. I can't make that call. It's up to the governors. But only days later, he comes out and says that he has ultimate authority. And so in both of these cases, you have sort of an interesting paradigm happening here. So you've got folks like me, you know, the more right libertarians, some small government conservatives, you know, people that are more likely to be critical of some of the things that President Trump does. So in that first instance, when he comes out and says, we have this thing called the Constitution, I can't do that. It's up to the governors. You've got folks like me that are going, yeah, right on, man. Keep it up. Give credit where credit is due. But then days later, when he comes out and declares that he has ultimate authority, that's when you've got this weird cult, the MAGA types, the trust the plan types, the QAnon types, you know, that are going, yeah, ultimate power. And they're okay with that because their guy is in right now. And they are willing to follow him almost disregarding the Constitution or the legal norms of our country. It's just this very strange thing to see. So in both instances, you're pissing one group off and the other group's cheering for you. And then vice versa with the other instance. And the strangest part of it is that both of these groups are on the right. I mean, you know, ish. I know a lot of libertarians, you know, LP members and such will say, no, we're not on the right. Listen. If you go down the list of issues, small government, Second Amendment, et cetera, generally speaking, libertarians they're certainly more on the right than on the left, if you look at the current position of the Overton window. But I digress. So you've got these two groups that are generally similar with one another. They're generally both on the right and coming to completely opposite conclusions based on what the president says, and he is contradicting himself. Just something to think about, something to consider. So another thing I wanted to talk about is the 2020 election coming up. It's a big deal. We all generally know how it's going to turn out, right? But now that Bernie Sanders has dropped out of the race, the presumptive Democrat nominee is going to be Joe Biden. The man doesn't know where he is half the time. He can't form a coherent sentence. So I, like many other people, like many of you, are watching this unfold and going, what the hell are they thinking? Joe Biden? Are you serious? So here's what I'm thinking, and I'm not getting conspiratorial with y'all, so don't think that's the case. I think this is strategy, right? Because the Democrats, they're not dumb. They're smart enough to know that Joe Biden, look, frankly, he has no business being up on the national stage, and I'm embarrassed for him. This is still a human being. He's still a man, but he's being, shuffled around and put in this position that he is literally mentally incapable of handling. He should be at home with his grandkids and, enjoying, frankly, what is probably the last time that he has left on this earth. But instead, they're shuffling him around and parading him around like he's a legitimate candidate. What are they thinking? So let me tell you what I think they're thinking. Because like I said, the Democrats, they're not dumb. I think the other shoe that's going to drop here with the 2020 election is his VP pick. Because they're not actually pushing Biden to be the president. They're pushing whoever the VP pick will be to be the president. Because we know, if by some miracle of God, the Democrats, well, I don't know if that would be of God, but if the Democrats won the general election, they know that Biden isn't going to last long. Either he will be pushed out under the 25th Amendment. I think it's the 25th Amendment. The whole mental capacity thing of the president. He's either going to be pushed out that way, or frankly, he's going to pass away. He's going to die. So who's going to immediately step in? It's going to be the vice president. So what I am very eager to see, I don't know if eager is really the right word. What I am intrigued to see is who they pick as the vice president nominee. Because let's be honest, let's face it here, that is who our president is going to be, not Biden. So just something to think about. And, you've got a lot of posturing on the left right now, especially with former Democrat candidates that have already dropped out. There's been a lot of talk of Beto O'Rourke being a cabinet member if the Democrats win the general election. And, of course, he's going to push on his bread and butter of gun control and all this other stuff. But there hasn't really been a clear pick or even open public discussion of who the VP would be. So I think they're going to wait till the last minute, and they're going to drop that bombshell, and then that is going to be their big push. So they're not pushing Biden forward. They're pushing forward whoever the VP pick is going to be. Anyway, so with this whole COVID thing going on, got a couple of shout outs I want to push out there. There's been a lot of protests going on, particularly in Michigan, Wisconsin, North Carolina, several other states. I want to applaud all of the folks that are going out there, even, the guys in the Hawaiian luau shirts and open carrying their ARs and everything else, because frankly, that's exactly what we need right now. We need people saying enough is enough. You don't get to decide for us, governors, or even president. You don't get to decide for us when we can go back to work. We decide for us when we can go back to work. And you've got all these people crying about it and, these people are reckless and they're dangerous. Listen, no one's telling you that you have to leave your house. You are the one telling them that they can't leave their house. So if you want to open things up and you're worried about the governor, if you don't want things opened up and you're concerned about the governor opening things up too early in your state, great. Don't leave your house. No one's going to make you leave your house. We're just talking about allowing other people to leave theirs. Okay? It's a very simple answer here. So those folks that are going out, they're standing up for themselves. They're making their voices heard. I've seen a lot of students from Young Americans for Liberty going out there and protesting and holding rallies and a lot of clever signs and stuff like that. That is exactly what we should be doing right now, because as the numbers come out, as we're doing more research on this thing, it is dangerous. The illness is dangerous. It is something that we should be taking seriously, but there's a balance there. I mean, our economy is in an absolute nosedive right now. So we have to find this balance between public safety, public health, and the health of our economy, because those two things are inextricably linked. Like, you can't have one without it affecting the other. So we have to find a balance between these two things. Otherwise, people have already lost their life savings. People have lost their jobs, their small businesses, their livelihoods. And now we're becoming more and more dependent on the government to take care of those things for us. That's not what this country is about. Even if it's in the name of, public safety or public health or whatever the case may be. It's about individuals deciding for themselves what is best for them and not anybody else. So I applaud those protesters. I applaud the folks going out there and making their voices heard. I applaud the Boogaloo boys, the Luau Big Igloo guys. I applaud the YAL students going out there and making their voices heard. That is exactly what we need, and this is what we are supposed to be about. We are putting pressure on our elected officials to not only have our voices heard because they work for us, but we are also putting pressure on them to not only know what we want, but to put more pressure on them to actually follow through with what we want. If they're representatives, then they need to represent us. That's what this ultimately comes down to. So I love seeing that stuff going on out there. Great job, guys. And last thing I wanted to talk about, I know I probably sound like a broken record at this point, but once all of this is over, once we've gone back to work, once we've gone back to church, we're starting to live our normal lives, we're seeing our family members again, etc., we cannot forget how far these people went in the name of security, in our names, and told us what we had to do. Because ultimately what this comes down to, the loss of life savings, the loss of jobs, the loss of small businesses, the loss of livelihood, wasn't because of the virus. It was because of the government clamping down as hard as they did and as quickly as they did and for as long as they did. So once this is all over, we cannot forget what they did, and we have to hold them accountable. And we have to push one another to hold them accountable. Perhaps more importantly, I think this is a wake-up call for a lot of people. Everybody kind of hit the oh crap button when all of this came down and realized how completely personally unprepared we were as individuals. How much food do you have stocked up? How much water do you have stocked up? Because before all of this went down, everybody was thinking, no, this could never happen here. This could never happen to us. But it did. So once this is all over, we can't go back to normal willingly. We have to go about our business, get our lives back together, rebuild, if you will. I know that sounds dramatic, but I think you get where I'm going with it. But at the same time, we need to keep in mind that this can happen here, and it can happen to us. And more importantly, it doesn't have to be a virus or an act of God that allows something like this to happen. It can just be our own government, or it can be our own government using an act of God as an excuse to push their own agendas. And I think that's what we've been seeing happening here, just a little taste of it. And we cannot forget how all of this happened. Anyway, that's all I've got today. That's my thoughts for this week. I appreciate you listening, and please come back next week to become more liberty-centered with us. I'm William Gadsden with Think Liberty.